Well, I think you needed to have journalism in this field. I mean, I would think if you didn't have journalism in this field, you can make a case that this is a grade two stakes. I know Sandman's a grade one winner, but he really didn't run that well in the Derby. You needed this, otherwise the rest of the field is really not an outstanding field.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Not interview. Today we're joined by our guest, Bob Ehalt from Bloodhorse.com. And the topic of our conversation today is Preakness, the 150th edition of the race, the second jewel of the Triple Crown. And we've got a lot of headlines here going into this weekend's race. And so let's get into it right now, Bob. Of course, we got the news last week about Sovereignty, the Kentucky Derby winner, will not be running in the Preakness this weekend. So we will not have a Triple Crown winner this year. Now, I'm sure you've had a lot of time to discuss this over the past week or so. I just want to get your thoughts on trainer Bill Mott and the Godolphin team's decision not to run Sovereignty in the race. And I'm going to, put this question pretty straightforward. Is this a bad thing for horse racing?
Well, let me say this. It doesn't help the sport. I mean, you just had 17 million people watching uh, watching the Kentucky Derby. They saw a horse win. It was an exciting stretch duel. And, again, for the hardcore racing fans, the regular racing fans, we're kind of used to things like this. For the general public, they're wondering, well, why aren't you going? There's and certainly it has to hurt a race like the Preakness when you don't have the Triple Crown in play, and even more so the Belmont Stakes, where they have not had a Triple Crown bid since 2018 when Justify won it all. And instead, what you get is like I'm driving down from Connecticut, where I live, to Baltimore, and I'm hearing radio reports about horse racing, but all it's talking about is not the Preakness draw, but they're talking about jockey Junior Alvarado getting fined for hitting the horse too many times, which is really a nonsensical thing because the story, I don't know why the industry doesn't say it out more loudly. Those whips don't hurt the horse. I assure you, if you've ever seen them, I have gotten the whip from Johnny Velasquez and I pounded myself with that whip. It does not hurt. The only way you can hurt a horse with that whip is if you poke him in the eye with it. So you all of a sudden are hearing people who don't know much about horse racing hearing about whip violations, and it's like it shouldn't even be a problem because they have created it. Makes noise, there's no doubt about it, but the old whips used to make noise and leave welts on a horse. There's no welts after with horses after races. But anyway, you get into the question that instead of the Preakness getting some news attention, you get that. And the decision not to go, look, it's always a hard read. Is the horse ready for the Preakness? If he's not, that's one thing. They are. I think there is a desire amongst Godolphin and Bill Mott to win races down the road. In like the Travers is what Bill Mott would call a bucket list item, and certainly the Dubai World Cup next year, being that the owner of Sovereignty is Sheikh Mohammed, who founded the race. Certainly, that would be a plum for him to win that race with one of his own horses. Um, but I don't necessarily get how running in the Preakness is going to prevent you from winning the Travers or winning the Dubai World Cup. I mean, if he gets beat in the Preakness, well, you skip the Belmont and you point for those other races. And if you run all three, well, if you're good enough to win all three, let me point out American Pharaoh did pretty well after he won the Triple Crown. He won the Haskell. He did get beat in the Travers, but he won the Breeders' Cup Classic by a pole. So even Bob Baffert will say, no, if your horse is good enough, that's not going to knock him out. And even last year, Wayne Lucas on 2 weeks rest, it wasn't the Derby, it was the Pat Day Mile with Seize the Gray. had that small amount of rest running on Derby Day and coming back in the Preakness. Now afterwards, he didn't run well at Saratoga in the Belmont or the Jim Dandy, but I think it was either Jim Dandy or Travers. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I think it was the Jim Dandy. But
Mhm.
he uh, but he ran pretty well at Parks and winning the Pennsylvania Derby. So again, you can't. It's hard it's hard to know exactly what's going on with horses and how they are conditionally wise. But the basic answer to the question is, of course, yes. It's not optimal for the sport, and it is something people have to think about. When they make these decisions, because the sport certainly needs the injection of uh, popular interest.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Now, I've heard a lot of the pundits in the industry discussing this topic, whether it's on radio. I've read a couple articles about it, and Randy Moss with NBC, he's been very vocal about his stance on this. And I heard him talking about how he believes the schedule should be modified. So, would you be in favor of a schedule modification, extending the amount of time between the Triple Crown races, to ensure that the best horses are involved in all three of the Triple Crown races?
Well, I mean, in theory, I totally agree. I think in terms of practicality, what is going to work and what is going to please everyone. Now, look, the Derby is the first Saturday in May. That's the given. Now, I've seen talk. Well, let's add a week on to the Preakness. I've talked to horsemen to top horsemen. 3 weeks won't matter in going to the Preakness. If they're going to skip it, they're still going to skip it. One extra week won't matter. So that idea is down the drain. Now you're getting into 4 to 5 weeks to get the Preakness. Well, what do you then do with the Belmont? Do you move that to July 4th? Naira's not really looking at that. I think, like you could see this year, they're having July 4th at Saratoga. They're considering it part of the Belmont, the what is it, the uh, Belmont at the Big A spring meet. So it's not considered Saratoga, but they're going to have several days of racing on July 4th weekend at Saratoga. Now, total conjecture. I'm not saying I know anything, but who knows if it's very successful? Does Naira decide, you know what, we're going to just start running racing at Saratoga in July? Now, how do you fit the Belmont Stakes in there? Because you can't pay $455 million for a Belmont Stakes that's open and operational and go up to Saratoga for July 4th. I'm sorry, and go to the Belmont at Saratoga and leave Belmont vacant when it's operational. So how do you stretch it out? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure if you carry the Triple Crown into July. Does it work for the fans that you really seem to want to go with? I think people's
Mhm.
attention span, it's limited. I think, I do think the 5 weeks is really good for keeping the attention of the national sports fans because they got so many other things to follow and watch. So if you're doing that for the fans and think that, I'm not sure if the having a better field offsets what you might get from people in July saying, "Oh yeah, 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 that was the Derby," right? And especially if your Derby winner loses in the Preakness, well, now the Belmont in July is going to really be an afterthought, lost in the shuffle pretty well. So there's pros and cons. I'm not really. I think the theory makes sense. I haven't heard a good answer how you could practically do it.
That's a great point you made there about if the Triple Crown is not in play, will people keep the interest after all that time? That's a great argument you made there. And it's certainly a debate that's going to rage on here, I'm sure, as well. Let's get into some of the horses that are running in the race, and the one that people were hoping they would see, they're going to get to see him. That's Journalism. Talk to us about how significant it is that Journalism is going to be a part of the race this weekend, especially because Sovereignty decided not to run. Journalism is a horse that, and I'm talking about the casual fans here because I'm a casual fan. I tune in for the three big races. He's a name that people are familiar with because we know him as the favorite from the Derby, the runner up at the Derby. his jockey. If you watch the Race for the Crown show on Netflix, which I did, I'm familiar with this jockey Umberto Rispoli. So he's a name that the casual fan can get behind, and I think that's significant. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you needed to have journalism in this field. I mean,
Mhm.
I would think if you didn't have journalism in this field, you can make a case that this is a grade two stakes. I know Sandman's a grade one winner, but he really didn't run that well in the Derby. You needed this, otherwise the rest of the field is really not an outstanding field. Um, they really, I don't think, again, um, for him in particular, once Sovereignty dropped out, there was no reason for him not to run, unless there was a physical issue. I mean, most times it's the other way. The Derby winner goes to the Preakness, and the runner-up says, "I'll meet you at the Belmont," and he takes advantage of the 5 weeks rest. In this case, though, I mean, here's a horse. Now, I think the morning line of 8 to 5 is kind of high. I think he's going to be higher. I think he's going to be lower than 8 to 5 at post time. So you've got, for the connections, you've got a horse. As much as maybe you don't like coming back in 2 weeks, but you got a horse that's probably, I think it's going to be 6 to 5 or even money in the race by the time the betting comes. It's an easy. I think it's a good chance to get a Triple Crown win, and then realistically, you're probably going to skip the Belmont, and you say, all right, let's plot out summer campaigns, and Sovereignty will meet you in the Travers, and we'll kind of decide this. There's also part of this in the game that does get overlooked a lot, and the breeding is a very important part of this game. People hear about breeding deals, but in this sport, it's unlike baseball where agents can't wait to say how long, how much money their guys signed for. With a breeding deal like journalism's breeding deal was consummated before he won the Santa Anita Derby and the Grade One. He got his first Grade One win, which is the minimum standard to be a top flight stallion. So, what they generally do in the industry is they assign a base price to the deal, and then they put in it what they call kickers, which means if you win this race, you get X amount of dollars. You win that race, you get X amount of dollars. You're named the champion 3-year-old, you get X amount of dollars.
Mhm.
I would estimate, or what people in the industry have told me, then this not a fish. This is not guaranteed, but I would say it's safe to say that winning the Preakness would get the connections a $2 million kicker to their
Yeah.
breeding deal.
Wow.
So aside from the purse, in which you have to share 10% to the trainer, 10% to the jockey, they're going to get a cool $2 million, I would say, at least. It could be more, could be a little less. It's not going to be much less than that for winning a classic race. So there was really every reason in the world for him to show up, especially after Sovereignty came. And it really has it gives the field at least a big horse that people could kind of follow, and let's see what happens.
Yeah. One of the other horses that I keep hearing a lot about is this River Thames, who's trained by Todd Pletcher, and Pletcher is seeking the career Triple Crown. He's 0 for 10 at the Preakness, still looking for that first win there. Talk to us about the horse and whether or not you think River Thames is a horse we should include in our betting tickets.
Yeah, I would use him. I'm right now kind of leaning between River Thames or Goal Oriented for second in the race. River Thames, I think he fits well into this race. He's got a good amount of speed to sit off the lead. He was second to Sovereignty by like a neck or so in the Fountain of Youth. So he showed some class. He was third in the Bluegrass, but he was only beaten less than a length. I like him. I think he's a good horse. I know Pletcher has had trouble with the Preakness. Todd might have some trouble with the 2 weeks sometimes with horses, but this one's had a full complement of, now, what are we talking, 6 weeks? I think Todd will have his horse ready for a big shot. And I think the way the field is set up, I could see him finishing second.
The field of this race is much smaller, only 9 horses. We saw 20 in the Derby. How does that change the jockey's approach? Is it more tactical in a 9 horse Preakness in terms of mid race adjustments and things like that? How do you see this shaking out in a smaller field?
Well, it's really a totally different Rubik's Cube than the Derby, because like when you get post one, you saw it if you watched the race. They showed you kind of the head on the horse on the rail. Bob Baffert's horse,
Mhm.
Citizen Bull, came out and basically took a right turn to get away from, make sure he doesn't get cut off and run into the rail.
Yeah.
Because if he got pushed over a little bit, he could be in trouble. So he kind of established his early position. With the Preakness, you have a longer run to the first turn. Well, maybe not longer, but I mean, you don't have the problem of the rail is there, so you don't have the problem of running into the rail. So the rail position is fine. The most of the other posts are big. If there's not a 20 horse field, outside, when you have 9 horses in a field, it's generally not going to be any kind of problematic. And most times, there are some people, some trainers will and jockeys, they'll say, well, we have to be on the lead, and they'll go for it. But a lot of times the jockeys will just kind of play the break, how their horse breaks, what happens, where they can move over, what they could do, and that'll determine it. And races like the Belmont and the Preakness are a little less dependent on the post positions and really tactics. The only thing I'd say is, like in a race like the Preakness, you probably don't want to get too far back. The speed horses generally do pretty well in it. So, uh,
Okay. So
you know,
what kind of pace do you expect? I mean, a small field, 9 horses, mile and 3/16. What kind of pace should we expect to see?
it'll be a good pace. It should be a good, honest pace. I don't see any, but I don't see any like horses who are going to be champion sprinters in the field who are going to set wacky fractions. The Derby, I think, had some pretty crazy fractions, but that was largely because the horse got off the wanted to, they wanted to get Citizen Bull off the rail, and once the jock did, it seemed he didn't put his foot on the brake. He just kept going. I think it's going to be a pretty modest. I think it's going to be a moderate pace. I don't think it's going to be overly fast. I think that's why I say I do think you probably want to be a little, somewhere close to that top flight of horses to have your best shot.
And then we'll get you out of here on this final question. I always like to ask this one for our betters that are out there listening. Is there a long shot or two that you think we should all be taking into consideration here?
Well, I really the thing with the Preakness sometimes is you see these long shots who really are don't go off as long shots and should. That's the thing I've noticed sometimes with this particular race. Uh, maybe American Promise, because he is Wayne Lucas. He's coming back in 2 weeks. I don't know what kind of. I think you may not get the kind of odds that you're not going to get the big balloon odds that you go with. Um, so he might be one. Um, I think it's going to be a fairly formful race. I mean, my top three would be journalism, River Thames, and goal oriented. If Goster is a price, he seems to be in good form. It's kind of hard to read what the board is going to be because you just get some wacky betting sometimes in the Preakness. I've just seen 90 to 1 shots that go off like 12 to 1. But
Yeah, and
I don't anticipate a big shocker in this race.
okay, great insight there. And you mentioned Wayne Lucas. He won the race last year with Seize the Gray, and this would be his 8th win at the Preakness, which would tie Bob Baffert for the most all time. So that'll be something that we want to keep a close eye on. Bob Ehalt, everybody
Yeah.
from bloodhorse.com. Bob, we appreciate all your time today. I know you're out there in Baltimore right now, real busy this week, and you made some time for us. So we appreciate that. Enjoy the race.
Thanks very much. Always a pleasure to talk with you.